Then what I would do, and I'm going to be talking about this, this is really a very important aspect of my soldering. Then I would take that bezel very carefully and I would lay it on this soft fire brick, okay? And what I do is I have all kinds of pieces, and a lot of times I'll have this whole thing up and these up against there, and it makes kind of like a simple little kiln or an oven. And then I will put this in the back, and what happens when I'm soldering, it's bringing the heat back in because this soft fire brick radiates the heat. It doesn't absorb the heat like a solid brick. And that allows me to get that heat. But you use such a small amount of solder right there. And by the way, the soldering tip I use most of the time you can buy at Home Depot in a little kit. This happens to be MAP gas. Propane or MAP gas will work. And I use that. Now I'm going to just light this and show you the size of the flame I would use. I would never use a flame that high for soldering the ends of that bezel together. I would get that thing way down about like that. What happens with the propane in that is you, being a liquid gas, look, it increased because the liquid goes, see, so you might have to reset it. Now, here is, this thing is worth the whole evening. This is a soldering pick. This is made out of 16th inch steel welding rod. That will allow you to move the solder around while it's still in a liquid form. Move it around. So let's say the solder flows a little bit to one side and it didn't fill the gap. You can very carefully heat and pull it over. Sometimes I will actually lay, well, let's see, I'll have to use this one. On a larger bezel, I'll actually lay the brick on it to hold it down flat. See? And then I solder that together, and it works great. Works great. At any rate, what I use for solder, I have always used wire solder. They have sheet solder, but every time before I solder, I will take some 320 sandpaper, which is the wet and dry sandpaper, silicon carbide, and I clean it because it literally tarnishes. And that creates surface tension, and I'm telling you, you will melt the piece and that solder will not flow if you don't have it clean.
On your hand too.
Believe me, it will happen. I always clean my solder. I take these little fine wire cutters, and there's an open side, and I brought these big babies so you could see what I'm talking about. And what I do, this is interesting too, what I do when I cut that tiny little piece off, I go over here like this, and then I put my finger here so that little piece doesn't, boom, and it's gone. You follow me? See what I mean? These simple, silly little things that you learn and find out. Now, you have to use solder flux. I have always loved the white cream stuff, or they sometimes, let's see, what else do they call it? Paste. But I always dilute it to about the consistency of non-fat milk, not whole milk, because you get too much flux, and then that's a problem too. Now, what is the function of flux? You guys know? It keeps the metal from oxidizing. It puts a shield over it, so when you heat it up, it really speeds up the oxidation process, and therefore the solder will not flow. So you put the flux on, I flux my solder and the piece, and then what I do, you guys, is take my, I have to look where I put all this stuff. I take my tweezers, and I pick it up, and I very carefully lay it there, and I can move it around. So if here's my join like this, I want the solder to run across this way, not up this way, because it can real easily go to one side or the other. I know I'm telling you a lot of stuff, but when you start doing something, it's going to, oh yeah, he said that. Follow me? So you put your solder across, and then you very carefully try to keep your torch where it's heating both sides the same. To this day, sometimes it still goes to one side. Believe me, it's tricky. At any rate, and so then you get it soldered, Now, there's also a part of soldering where you have to use pickle. It cleans the oxidation and it dissolves the flux. There's a commercial product, and you get that at Rio Grande. The old days, I don't even know if they make it anymore, they called it Sparex. It's a granule type of thing, and you use water. And then I have a little electric hot plate, and I use a Corning pot, and you get it about 140 degrees or so, just when it's starting to steam a little, but turn it off because you can very easily forget and it starts to boil. At any rate, and then you put your pieces in there and it gets them beautifully clean, and if you have to continue to solder, then it's ready to go and you've gotten rid of the oxidation. Okay? So, okay, now let me see. And for God's sake, stop me and ask a question, because I know we have limited time and I'm trying to share a number of things with you. So, okay, let me think a minute. Okay, so we talked about soldering. The next thing I want to do is take a fine jeweler's file and file across that area to get that beautifully smooth, and then sand lightly with 320 grit sandpaper, preparatory to soldering that down on my jewelry piece. Okay, now, please understand how you're going to support this. Well, first of all, I have slipped a bezel on a ring mandrel, and then that keeps it in place. These are called drift punches. They're used in the auto industry and other places. I get these at Sears or Roebuck or Harbor Freight or places. For the smaller bezels, I can slip them on this one or mid-size. You follow what I'm saying? If I was doing something larger like this, luckily, I have these big bracelet mandrels. They start about that big around and they taper down. Well, you can get a dowel or something, Home Depot, or a piece of wood if you have a concern, and get it to a shape, or get a plastic bottle that's a bit stiff, like pill bottles or something a little bigger, and just get some support so you can get that sanded. You with me? Mm-hmm. That's got to be done. Don't solder it and go, oh, look at that. See? So at any rate, that becomes important. Now, what about the fire brick? There's a place in Santa Ana called Aardvark Clay and Supply. It's for ceramic, I was a potter as well with that. And they're in Santa Ana, and I have their phone number right here. And if anybody's interested, you guys can copy it down, or I could give it to Veronica, and she could maybe have it available. At any rate, they sell this soft fire brick. People, I cannot tell you how important that stuff is. That makes soldering so much easier. You know those trivets, I think they call them? You're blowing all your heat out into space. You're not capturing any heat. I hate those things. I don't know why they ever made those things. Well, I would have if I could have sold them and made money. But at any rate, this stuff is golden because you can take a simple saw, you can cut it up into smaller pieces and that. And at home, I'll tip this up, and I can bring these things over here. I can put a cover if I need to, and I really capture my heat. There's another reason why. You only have a certain window of time to heat it up and get the solder to flow before the flux burns out. Once the flux is gone, you oxidize it and you start over. You pickle the thing, get it all clean. You see what I'm saying? So do be aware of that. There is a certain window of time. Now, what causes the solder to flow? Anybody have a clue or any thought on that? Flux. No, the flux, it helps. It keeps the metal clean. But what causes the solder to flow? Heat. Yeah, obviously heat. Okay. Now, the bezel is very thin, isn't it? Do you think that's going to heat up quick? Yeah. You darn right. The solder will flow as soon as the metal is hot enough to receive it. Guess what? You're not paying attention to heat. You heat the bezel up too much, whoop, your solder goes right up on the bezel, and it gets thicker, and it doesn't solder it to the plate. It happens all the time. This fire brick is, again, reflecting the heat. Now, this is where these guys come in handy. Let me share something with you. If I am doing a piece, let's say that I have put this bezel on here. It doesn't fit, but let's say I have put that bezel on there, or want to. Okay, and this is where these diagrams are going to come in handy. I would take these solder clips and lay them like this, and I would lay my metal on there because it's elevated that metal from the brick. I can echo heat underneath and start heating that plate first, and if I, I'm sorry, you go right ahead. And if I put this here, that is also kicking heat back. You follow me? I'm capturing the source of heat. So that I'm watching very carefully. I'm watching the color of this. I could care less about the bezel. I'm watching this, and I'm going around. This is brass. I don't do this stuff with brass. I use sterling if I'm making jewelry. At any rate, I'm doing that. So I have my torch here, and I'm flowing around, and I'm coming a little here, and I'm going like this. I can come back and come forward. Now, listen to this, and this is important. The thinner or smaller pieces of metal will heat up quicker, but they cool down quicker. So what happens at a certain point, you hit an equilibrium, and the solder just goes right around there. And it's, oh, wow, it happened, see? Now, if for some reason you overheat and the solder goes up on the bezel, don't worry about it. If you have some of these, you can very gently take that diamond. These are diamond, industrial diamond. You can very gently go around without thinning the bezel and clean that up. You with me? Mm-hmm. Don't get it on the outside because then you really create a mess. But you can clean that up. See, you're not lost. So be aware of that and such. Now,